because it's kind of just business as usual. The trend is basically just to continued accumulation long term. I will note that they've dumped roughly 30,000 Bitcoin in the last 2-ish weeks from June 3rd until the latest close yesterday.
Hey everybody, welcome into the Thinking Crypto podcast. Joining me is Brian from Santiment. And as you know, we're going to do a deep dive into the metrics, the sentiment, and much more around Bitcoin and all the altcoins. Brian, great to see you.
Good to see you, Tony. Up and down week. Sentiment's kind of starting to drift into bearish / a little impatience, which is exactly what a lot of bulls want to see, right? We want to see that the retail crowd is starting to shift into impatient kind of mode. And that tends to be when good things start to happen.
Yeah, it's so funny, right? It's the contrarian signal that the majority of people may say, oh man, this market's not doing anything. I'm tired. I'm giving up. I'm walking away. I'm selling. It's over. But then the bulls and the folks who are, doing the opposite of what's happening out there, they are looking at this like, the opportune moment to see all of this happening.
I was talking with the data team a little this morning, and we're seeing an increase in specific calls related to target prices to buy back in. So the trend right now is a lot of people sitting on the sidelines, maybe getting more into stocks or something else, that even gold, something moving a little more than crypto has lately, and waiting for 100K, waiting for 90K, even lower than that. We're seeing all sorts of target prices to buy back in, even though I did the calculation this morning, we're just 6.2% off of the all-time high, and people are acting all of a sudden like what have you done for me lately? Getting into that mindset like, oh, the all-time high was already a full month ago now. So we are dealing with a bit of a spoiled kind of bunch lately, and for good reason. It's been such a good couple of years for crypto. So this is generally a good scenario where you're seeing people saying, oh, I still am bullish long term, but bearish short term, because I just think that Bitcoin's going to go to this based on the 17 lines I drew on TradingView.
Yeah. And it's funny, I also get comments of, people who are not allocated to Bitcoin. They're like, where's the bull market? I'm like, the bull market started in January 2023. And because you were misallocated, you didn't have some Bitcoin in your portfolio, you missed a lot of the gains. And I keep trying to tell people that don't be maximalist for any token, and diversify, hold some Bitcoin. And yes, you can have your altcoins, but Bitcoin is, has the higher probability of seeing those gains, while certain altcoins may not.
Exactly. Yeah. Some people fall in love with whatever coin made them the most money the last bull cycle, right? And they feel like there's an allegiance to them. And to an extent, that's okay. You might believe in the long-term viability of a certain asset, but if you don't diversify, you can miss out on quite a few individual runs just based on the cyclical nature of crypto.
Absolutely. All right, Brian, show us the charts that you're looking at. We could start with Bitcoin. Maybe we look at sentiment.
You bet. Let's start there. I pulled up this handy dandy sentiment chart that just looks at the daily ratio of all the bullish versus negative comments over the past 3 months here. And generally, the higher we go, the more likely we're getting close to a top. If we get super low, we're getting close to a bottom. So naturally, this was a great signal to buy right after Trump announced the tariffs, and people were running around like chickens with their heads cut off, assuming that we were going to just absolutely fall off a cliff. Of course, after a medium-sized retrace, it ended up being the perfect time to buy. And I know a ton of people are kicking themselves after, this bearish bar right here happened. And then we went on about a 46% run en route to that new all-time high in May. So since that time, we saw, of course, that huge bullish spike here. What a coincidence. This is where prices top out and we start to go down. And then we actually got pretty bearish just about 4 days ago. We're shooting this on the 19th. This was on the 15th. And we ended up going on a little mini rally back above 108. Then people got a little bit bullish again and we fell back down. Now we're kind of sitting a little in the middle, arguably just slightly bearish. We have some other signals here that show more clearly how bearish people are getting. But just in terms of all the overall bullish versus bearish comments that our algorithm is picking up, it doesn't look like people are showing a lot of patience right now. It's a growing amount of frustration if we just look at the overall trend, since mid-May or so on these gold lines.
Yeah. And, when I look at the Bitcoin chart on TradingView and I look at like the RSI, I think sometimes people don't realize the market becomes overheated and they want it to keep going, right? It must keep going up, must keep going, like it has to go up in a straight line. But markets are cyclical. And, this cool down, if you look at the RSI and the Bitcoin chart, it looks healthy because it was overbought and then now it's going to the oversold.
Exactly. Yeah, we've got RSI actually. I rarely use it because it's already so available elsewhere. But I can tell you that on the RSI, we did fall back below 50. Let me just get rid of this extra line here. So just looking at the RSI first, here's the midway point. I know people who really value RSI and use it a lot more than I do. But from what I've seen in my analysis, this was the point in which we fell back below that midway point and went into slightly bullish range here. Not by much. 47 is pretty even, but you can see how rare it's been over the last 2.5 months or so for us to actually be below the 50 line for RSI.
Yeah. And I expect, I often tell people, look, if we're overbought, you got to anticipate the market's going to go the opposite way. When we become oversold and sellers, become exhausted, then the market's going to go the other way. And of course, the sentiment follows that, which we were talking about. The retail herd, right? They get very excited when we're heated up, everybody's buying and so forth. And then, but
it's always that lagging emotional reaction after the fact, right? People are way more bullish after Bitcoin goes up to 112 as opposed to being bullish back when it's in the low 100Ks or in the 90Ks. So it's just the nature of the beast. It's always a what have you done for me lately kind of mindset. And this is why the majority of retailers lose money, because they refuse to buy in when everyone else on their timeline is spewing the bearish narrative, and they refuse to sell when everyone is spewing the bullish narrative. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I wanted to, on a related note to RSI, this is kind of like the cousin of RSI is MVRV. And here we see that the average returns, when you take all the addresses that have interacted on the Bitcoin network in the past 30 days, the average returns are at about -2%. So that actually is a slightly encouraging sign that we could see a bit of a rebound. What we didn't want to do is buy in. I mean, there were times across mid-April to mid-May where it actually would have worked out as you bought in while others were already in profit. But generally, you want to, I love using these emojis when I can. Don't buy when you're seeing the MVRV way up here, especially like above, I'd say 10% or so. So avoid that zone when you get way up here. And then you want to send the rocket ships when we're way down below, roughly -5, -10%. Like we saw, really the only opportunity we saw was back when the tariffs were first announced. But it's at least in negative territory now, which is good.
Yeah. And, I find this data is so valuable because it's what the smart money uses. They're not walking by their emotions. Oh, the price is up, I feel happy today, or the price is down, I feel sad. But what is the data telling us? And this is so much in alignment with how the market moves, and of course, a contrarian to the retail sentiment. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, and one final thing to say on that, 98% or so of your viewers are well aware of the concept of buying low and selling high. But if we go back, 10 years, right? Let's just look at 2015 to 2025. And we'll just look at price by itself. So if you look at this chart, you tell me what the low and the high is, right? It's impossible when you look at different time frames. And what MVRV does is it allows you to understand what the high versus low is relative to the average traders that you're competing with. It may look like you're all on the same team because the timeline is going like we're all going to the moon. But the reality is crypto is a zero-sum game, and you don't want to be buying in when everyone else has already profited plus 50% like they did in late November 2017. And you do want to get in when people are in massive pain like they were in May 2021, or the crash in 2022 after the FTX debacle, stuff like that. There's no better way to know what a low versus a high is than looking at MVRV, in my opinion, and RSI to an extent helps. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned what you did.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of smart money, what are the whales doing? Are they continuing to accumulate?
Yeah, and we don't need to even spend a ton of time on it because it's kind of just business as usual. The trend is basically just to continued accumulation long term. I will note that they've dumped roughly 30,000 Bitcoin in the last 2-ish weeks from June 3rd until the latest close yesterday. But it's not a giant dump by any means. It's kind of just a minor one that I would need to see way more before I'm concerned that Bitcoin's about to fall off the cliff due to lack of smart money support.
And if you look at the chart, there was a huge spike. So it looks like it could be like the whales who are playing the short-term game. And then of course, they're the long-term one, the ones that view it from a long-term and that are slowly, steadily accumulating. But that spike, I mean, it seems like a natural decline off that huge spike.
You're referring to this June 3rd one right here that I'm highlighting?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, between this 1 week, between late May to early June, they added about 100K Bitcoin. That was massive. And part of the reason they kept accumulating is because prices were actually slowly sliding down a bit, giving them more and more justification to accumulate more as retailers were panicking here. And then naturally, as we rebounded, that's when they offloaded. So they kind of made a short-term play here, it looks like, where they just simply accumulated for a week while it was going down and then dumped for a week while it was going up. And now it's kind of just, when you see prices range, that's actually some of the best timing for actually understanding what the smart money's real mindset is. Because they're not just accumulating because prices are going down or dumping because prices are going up. They're watching prices kind of stay in this 103 to 106K range, and they're slowly adding more, meaning it's pretty indisputable that they're quite bullish for the mid and long-term timeframes.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, how are ETF inflows looking? I saw folks on Bloomberg and so forth, they were highlighting there have been a good amount of inflows.
Yeah, this is looking really good. This is, even though it's saying June 17th on my screen, it's a time zone thing. So this was actually the close of yesterday. We've now seen 7 straight days. Today is actually an off day for global stock markets due to Juneteenth, but 7 straight days prior to today has been nothing but inflows. Not a single outflow day since going back to June 6th. So it's actually a very encouraging sign that inflows keep on coming despite prices sliding mildly over the last, 4-ish, actually full week or so, really.
Interesting. Now, if we could talk stablecoins, Tether supply, and then of course, I want to get your thoughts on mentions of stablecoin because we had the Genius Act passed in the Senate. So I'm curious what people are saying. Are they bullish about that news and things like that?
Yeah. So for starters, we can just look at the overall mentions of stablecoins. The red line here is social dominance. So this is like the actual percentage of discussions related to the word stablecoin, USDT or USDC. I might as well add stablecoin or stablecoins so we can get the full picture. Yeah, it's about the same. So you can see the social dominance really hit its peak about a month from today, a month ago, and it's back up there now. So we're over 2% of all discussions in crypto being related to stablecoins and USDT and USDC. So people are clearly talking about it a lot. But if we get a little more crafty here, I can say, let's put all those words together, stablecoins and the word bullish, and we'll see what happens here. Yeah, so you see this big spike on June 17th, just a couple days ago. Definitely people are happy about this overall result and believe it's good for crypto. That's what I would take away from this.
Interesting. And then as far as Tether supply and how that's been performing, curious what you're seeing on that front.
Yeah, let's check out. We'll just do a quick look at both Tether and USD coin to see how the supply and exchanges are looking. We'll do overall as well as the ratio of all Tether. So there's about $33.5 billion worth of Tether on exchanges right now. It's dropped pretty dramatically going back to early February. About 4.5 months of time elapsing has led to $10.57 billion less of Tether on exchanges and about 14% of all Tether less on exchanges right now. So the dry powder that's available has declined pretty dramatically for crypto's top stablecoin.
Yeah, and one of the metrics I usually share with my listeners and viewers is Tether dominance. And obviously, in the past month or so, we saw a decline, not a full-on drop like we saw in Q4 of last year and even Q1, Q2 of 2024. But it's getting there. So I'm curious to see how this plays out. Could this be the last leg of the bull market as we head into July? Bitcoin maybe goes to 135 to 140K. Altcoins do their final move. Or, maybe the supply starts to reverse, more USDTs minted as whales come back in.
Yeah, that's interesting. So just to clarify, are you referring to Tether's market cap versus the rest of crypto's market cap?
Oh, so it's a Tether dominance metric on TradingView. So kind of like Bitcoin dominance, where it shows.
I think that's market cap. I'm pretty sure that's what TradingView refers to. If they're talking about Bitcoin dominance, at least we know it's about price or overall market cap share that Bitcoin has versus everything else. So Tether probably is the same thing.
Yeah.
So I was just checking USDC, by the way. Market cap's pretty flat and supply on exchanges is actually going up. But now let's look at Tether's market cap overall. And it's been huge. Yeah. It's a massive rise in market cap, which you don't often see because Tether's price is always going to be pegged at $1, but its market cap is still always doing its own thing. And yeah, there's about nearly $11 billion more market cap over the past 2 months.
Interesting.
That's a pretty huge rise. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. I mean, it could be like, if everything goes according to plan and what we've seen historically with the 4-year cycles, this, is the blow off top year. So I would expect to see the stablecoin supply increase significantly, specifically around Tether. And then of course that will be moved into the crypto market. Then it will cool down as the prices go up, then the rotation back into it as people take profits.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just curious because the minting process for Tether's always a bit of a mystery. I'm sure some people know it pretty well, but if we look at the supply outside of exchanges, yeah, it's pretty much inverse. So it looks like it's a pretty direct correlation of coins moving out of exchanges and going into cold wallets. I was just curious if there's just like maybe the ratio is going down because there's a big boost in minted Tether going into cold wallets and stuff, which does happen. But it's pretty, it doesn't look like there's much variation. They're pretty much mirror images of each other right now.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's talk some altcoins. We could start with ETH. since that's been looking good lately. And there's been some pretty positive news as well with companies adopting an ETH corporate treasury strategy.
Yeah, I wanted to start here. I put this out just about an hour ago. It's just a nice look at network growth over time. So for those kind of doubting Ethereum, now that it's kind of petered out at around 2,500 and that big rally from late May has temporarily come to a stop, we look at network growth, which is just the overall amount of new addresses being created. Each of these yellow bars represents 1 week over the past year. And there was about 560,000 to 670,000 new wallets being created per week last summer around this time. Now we're up at anywhere between 800K to 1 million. And the long-term trend is pretty clear. This is the healthiest we've ever seen Ethereum's ecosystem look in terms of just overall growth. So I am very encouraged by what Ethereum is doing underneath the hood right now. As people obsess over price, the long-term sustainability is looking stronger than ever.
Yeah, I'm bullish on ETH, not just because I'm a token holder. Just I see a lot of adoption, and there's so many layer twos and so many people building on it. And I think of similar to what happened with XRP. People, okay, it's a dead coin, nothing's going to happen. Yet it's still in the top 10, right? Top 5. ETH was having that similar moment. Everybody, oh, it's dead, it's not doing anything. Solana is the better coin. Then all of a sudden it starts melting faces. And I think as the SEC approves staking in ETH ETFs is going to drive a lot of demand.
I would agree. Yeah, I mean, if you can start to stake from an ETF perspective, that's one of the only things that I think was holding it back was the risk in holding it on chain, and ETFs would solve that problem. And if you can start to stake on top of that, I mean, get ready to open the floodgates in terms of interested parties.
Can we look at the MVRV for ETH?
Yeah, by the way, funding rate is pretty neutral too. I've been keeping an eye on that to see if shorts start to pop up since negative sentiment's starting to creep in. But in terms of MVRV, which is right here, looking pretty good. So they're both in negative range right now, implying that adding on or buying a position is less risky than usual at this time. 30-day MVRV is at about negative 3.9%, 365 days about negative 6.7%. So as long as you got both of these in negative range, as you can see, the last time we had that happen was late April. And yeah, that turned out to be a pretty nice formula for price rises right after that happened. So we're not as extreme in the negative range as we saw when, people were freaked out about the tariffs. But the fact that we've been in this negative range for short and long-term traders is a solid sign.
Yeah, for sure. Let's look at XRP. And that has had a lot of big news as well recently. Also, companies looking to do use it as a treasury reserve asset.
Yeah, and by the way, the price has really taken a beating. It's not really a reflection of XRP's overall viability, but it's down 17.5% over the last 5 weeks or so. So there could be an opportunity to buy the dip with some of this positive news coming out. I'm seeing plenty of big spikes in terms of active addresses, like we saw last week, circulation spikes in early June. So on-chain wise, the network looks plenty healthy. MVRV wise, because of XRP's huge performance at the end of 2024, there's still a lot of average profiting going on long-term, but at least on the short-term basis, 30-day traders are down about 3% now, giving an argument that buying in for the short term makes a lot of sense now. Funding rate is super neutral at the moment. It would be great if people start to doubt XRP, because that would imply those liquidations can really shoot up prices with some rocket fuel. But yeah, I don't see anything signaling bearishness here. I see a lot more positive signs than negative. even dormant tokens, that's what this line represents. So when it's going down rather than up, it's implying that a lot of stagnant coins are moving back into circulation. Especially right here, this big bar means there was just a massive amount of XRP that moved away from an older wallet that had just been sitting and hodling a bunch of coins, and they moved it back into circulation. And right afterwards, we see that big jump. So we look for slopes in that. Whoops, didn't mean to click on that. We look for slopes in this yellow line here because it implies that the network is younger in terms of the average coins being held in each specific wallet. So I like the look of XRP.
Interesting. Yeah. And it feels like, going back to what we were talking about with the cyclical move of the market, with RSI and MVRV for Bitcoin, and, Bitcoin leads the market. If Bitcoin was to bottom in the coming weeks or so and then start moving, I think we know these altcoins generally follow. So we could see a nice bounce for ETH, XRP, and some of the others.
Completely agree.
How about Solana? What are you seeing on that front?
So Solana, we just have social data as well as some transaction volume data now. We've been actively working on getting the blockchain data onto Santiment's network. So we're actually super excited to finally have transaction volume. You can actually see the turning point when there was a huge transaction volume spike followed by a drop down. These big spikes often signal a turning point. As you can see, even here in late April, we're going way up. We see this spike start to go down. We start to go down. We see the spike and we begin to rebound. We go up here, biggest spike of the year, and we start to go down. So that's interesting to see on Solana's side, which has actually slid about 22% in the last 5 weeks. If we look at the sentiment, and funding rate, by the way, is looking neutral. But if we look at social dominance, it's not getting talked about much right now. It's actually quite low. This is just the percentage of discussions related to Solana versus other cryptocurrencies. And it's kind of at its base of a little over 3% now, when there are moments where it's above 10. And that's when people are really, really getting behind Solana, or at least it's becoming polarizing, which is generally good for the asset. And if we just look at the bullish versus bearish sentiment, yeah, it's come down quite a bit. There's still about 4 bullish comments for every 1 bearish comment. Yeah, it kind of just looks like Solana is being glossed over right now as people are distracted by others.
Interesting. I wonder if some of the, how should I put it, the bullishness has calmed down. Obviously, in general, because the market has cooled down, right? But also the meme coin movement has kind of died down in a way. Don't get me wrong, there's still meme coins out there, some that may be performing okay, but there's not that retail excitement, going after these new meme coins and much more.
Yeah, great point, Tony. I do think that Solana is one of those ecosystems that's strongly tied to meme coin performance. And if the more speculative driven assets start to dry up, Solana itself gets a bit of a hit. And you can see just in the last week, it's kind of a sea of red. There's always a few, exceptions out there, but I'd say 90 to 95% of the assets we're looking at here are bleeding quite a bit.
Yeah. And even though there's been like some news around Solana corporate treasury, I know the ETF, the spot ETF, is making some level of progress with the SEC asking for comments and much more. It hasn't gotten much traction, and that could be, going back to the meme coin situation, because a lot of what maybe caught people's attention around Solana over the past year has been the meme coins versus other things.
Completely agree.
Interesting. Good stuff, Brian. And as always, if we're meeting in the next 2 weeks, fingers crossed that, we're finding a bounce. Bitcoin has bottomed, we're bouncing, and then the alts follow. And, what we can be charted, looking at different data.
Yeah, I think July is going to be a big month, not necessarily bullish or bearish, but it'll be big in terms of news, because we've got, of course, the conflict between Israel and Iran heating up, and that's impacting markets. But even bigger than that, in my opinion, not in terms of real world importance, but in terms of crypto markets, would be the tariff situation, because we've had this 90-day pause on China and US tariffs, and that's going to kind of reach its head in mid to late July, if I'm not mistaken. And then the EU and the US also have a pause. So everything's been kind of kicked down the road, and come about 30 to 45 days from now, it's all going to start. We're going to find out how real these negotiations have been.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that. It's just they just paused it and pushed it out. Maybe the Trump does that again, and that allows markets to feel bullish again, similar to what we saw with the V-shaped recovery for the stock market and everything, and that sends us higher. But we'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me as always, Tony.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brian.